Power creep is a concept where as a game's life goes on, new, more powerful content is gradually released, undermining older content to a degree. To give you an example, take the Pokemon TCG. This Wailord EX card from the 2003 set Sandstorm has the highest HP stat in the game, at a massive 200, but this is at the cost of it being an EX card, which gives your opponent double the reward for taking it out. Compare this to the Wailord released last year in Journey Together. It's a stage 1, but it's not an EX card yet. It has 240 HP, in addition to having fewer weaknesses and a lower retreat cost. This is the most direct form of power creep. The new Wailord is simply better in every relevant way, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Power creep can be a way of keeping the metagame fresh and interesting by adding in new, slightly stronger elements. It's a way to shake things up, and it has been 22 years since the original Wailord EX was released, so power creep had a long time to gradually build. But power creep can be a horrible, game-ruining thing if it happens too rapidly, or reaches a certain breaking point. And that is exactly what I believe the Pokemon video game is moving towards. Power creep doesn't just happen through Pokemon though, it happens through items and moves too. Take the choice items. They didn't always exist. First introduced in Generation 3, the choice items massively grew the power level of Pokemon that could wield them. Now you didn't have to take a turn to set up a speed, attack, or special attack boost. You could just use your item slot to boost whatever stat you wanted by 50%. There's also the Life Orb, which similarly boosts damage by 30%. And over the years we've gotten new moves like Close Combat, Wave Crash, and Poltergeist. Now this is what I would consider a healthy form of power creep. These items and moves increase the power level of the game, sure, but they're more universal changes than specific ones given to singular Pokemon. Every Pokemon can wield the Life Orb, and many Ghost-type Pokemon can use Poltergeist. That, and they all come with drawbacks to consider. The items I listed all have a negative that come with the positive. The choice items lock you into using one single move you choose until you switch out, meaning there's a lot to be considered when selecting your attack. And Life Orb drains a tenth of your HP every time you attack. The move Poltergeist is also 90% accurate and fails if your opponent has no item. These drawbacks make the new moves and items something that isn't just a strict upgrade from what came before them, it makes team building more interesting. You can't just slap a choice band onto a Pokemon and call it a day. You have to carefully consider whether you want that item or not. For example, Dragonite, a powerful single sweeper whose reliance on Dragon Dance makes Choice Band a less appealing item than say Heavy Duty Boots, which helps you start your sweep. But you could opt for a Dragonite that has immediate power with Choice Band instead, if you wanted to. Or maybe you want the loaded dice to make your scale shots more reliable. These items foster creativity and make it so you can run many different styles even with a single Pokemon. Items are accessible to almost every Pokemon too. When a new item gets added, it's a universal change that hundreds of Pokemon can take advantage of, even if the power level goes up. New moves aren't as universal, but move access can also act as a form of balancing as no way to add diversity. For example, the move Follow Me is one of the best moves in double battling, as it protects your Pokemon's teammate from attacks by using its own body as a shield. This gave Magmar, a Pokemon that wasn't even fully evolved, a niche in VGC as a defensive fire type, and Follow Me gave it a way to distinguish itself from the ever-present Incineroar. As while Incineroar can similarly reduce damage, it cannot use Follow Me like Magmar. New moves are another way of closing the gap between weaker and stronger Pokemon, or at least give them a niche. These are both healthy forms of power creep. The power level of Pokemon rise and some benefit more than others, but it's in a way that's accessible to even lower tier Pokemon and also adds depth to the team building process. Of course, there are a few controversial items and moves, but that doesn't mean the concepts are bad entirely. But that's not the kind of power creep you should be worried about. What is more pressing is the type of power creep that completely supplants what came before it in every meaningful way, raising the power ceiling so high that the game revolves around it, or creates a volatile scenario where you must have a hard counter to such a thing or lose because of it. This type of power creep is embodied by the Pokemon Rillaboom, the grass starter from Galar with the ability Grassy Surge. It sets up the grassy terrain onto the field to give Pokemon passive recovery and strengthen grass-type moves. Rillaboom completely took the job of a Pokemon released just one generation before it, Tapu Bulu, the legendary Pokemon of the Alola region that also had the same ability. Tapu Bulu was a strong Pokemon that also supported its team through its ability, which was its biggest draw. It had a massive 130 attack stat to utilize that grassy terrain boost well, making it hit incredibly hard with Wood Hammer. But none of that really mattered when Rillaboom released. Rillaboom had comparable attack and bulk, but it was faster than Tapu Bulu. Not only that, Rillaboom came with the move Fake Out, an incredible support move in VGC. It's a normal type move that immobilizes an opposing Pokemon for one turn. Fake Out gave Rillaboom a massive edge over Tapu Bulu. Sure, Bulu had the fairy typing, which could be nice defensively sometimes, but offensively it was worthless since Bulu couldn't use the premier fairy type physical move in Play Rough, so that was hardly a reason to drop Fake Out for it. But any justification for the use of Tapu Bulu over Rillaboom instantly collapsed the moment the Isle of Armor DLC came out for Sword and Shield, where Rillaboom received the move Grassy Glide, a 70 base power grass type move that gained priority properties when used in grassy terrain, which, as you may remember, Rillaboom sets up. This move was absurd. It was a priority move already stronger than Scizzor's famous Bullet Punch, and Rillaboom set up the terrain by default, so that was hardly a condition you had to keep in mind. This gave Rillaboom the ability to hit hard with a priority move, and even if your opponent switched to change the terrain, it's not like Grassy Glide would fail, it would simply lose its priority properties. The second Rillaboom switched in, it set up grassy terrain, threatened Fake Out, or could simply outpace all Pokemon with the Grassy Glide and drop a massive Wood Hammer, all with a single switch. Compare this to Tapu Bulu, who could only really switch in and threaten a Wood Hammer, since it didn't have access to Grassy Glide or Fake Out. There was no world where you'd use Tapu Bulu on a serious team over Rillaboom, and the data matches this. Where Rillaboom is on thousands of teams, Tapu Bulu completely disappeared. And Tapu Bulu was already a great Pokemon, but Rillaboom, being an upgraded Tapu Bulu in a multitude of ways, made it consume competitive in a way that only Incineroar before it did. It was and continues to be on a ton of top teams, being a staple with Incineroar and Urshifu Rapid Strike, while Tapu Bulu just doesn't have a role in competitive anymore. Tapu Bulu was a Pokemon with defined strengths, but limitations too, while Rillaboom also isn't uncounterable by any means. Its utility and damage options completely supplanted the legendary Tapu Bulu, and increased the power level with that Grassy Glide attack, which drastically reduced the viability of many Pokemon weak to grass. But Rillaboom is simply one example of many. Staying around that Generation 7 and 8 area, let's take a look at Arcanine and Alolan Persian. These are two Pokemon whose support traits gave them a unique role on a team. Alolan Persian had poor stats, but a high speed and the ability Fur Coat made up for this. Persian had access to the moves Fake Out and Parting Shot, two phenomenal supporting moves in doubles. Parting Shot reduces the opponent's attack and special attack while switching the user out, which allowed Alolan Persian a great pivoting option to maneuver around in battle. Arcanine was also a great support Pokemon with its nice fire typing and Intimidate ability, which lowered the attacking stats of the opposing team. This and Arcanine's good bulk made it a great pivot to reduce damage. While these two were active, teams often had to choose which they wanted. Would they go with Persian's superior maneuverability and positioning, or Arcanine's stats and Intimidate ability? The choice between the two wasn't easy, but it was one worth making, and sometimes players would even run both. It was an interesting choice to make in team building that was erased by a Pokemon that made it so there was no choice to be made. It was a Pokemon that... who am I kidding? Fake Out, Parting Shot, Intimidate. You know who I'm talking about. Incineroar, if you aren't aware, is a fire and dark type Pokemon from the Alola region. It combines all the good traits of Arcanine with Alolan Persian. When Incineroar got the Intimidate ability, the same one Arcanine had, and the tools that Persian had in Fake Out and Parting Shot, there was no longer a choice to be made between Persian and Arcanine. You could have your cake and eat it too with this Pokemon. With a single switch to Incineroar, you not only got an Intimidate onto the opponent, you threatened a Fake Out too, or you could simply Parting Shot to pivot into another Pokemon. This made Incineroar the premier support Pokemon. If you wanted a Fake Out user, use Incineroar to get Intimidate down too. If you wanted an Intimidate user, use Incineroar to threaten Fake Out at the same time. Incineroar reduced the question of support Pokemon down to simply Incineroar, and this answer remains pretty consistent even to this day. Incineroar simply has every tool that you could want on a Pokemon. It can actually struggle to fit moves besides its tried and true combinations. But power creep isn't just hitting farmers and plumbers like Arcanine and Persian. No, power creep is also hitting the strongest of the strongest. For a long time, restricted Pokemon, the class that includes the legendary trios on the box of a game as well as Mewtwo, were balanced to have supreme stats by attack and bulk, but they usually had below average speed stats. Take the super ancient trio, Rayquaza, Groudon, and Kyogre. Groudon and Kyogre in particular are both overwhelmingly powerful with their abilities setting the sun and rain, but their speed stats are quite underwhelming. Of course, this doesn't mean they're bad, they're still some of the greatest Pokemon ever created, but that did give them a shortcoming that could be exploited by a wide variety of Pokemon. Their signature moves are also powerful but inaccurate at 85% accuracy, meaning there's a real chance you could whiff a move and lose. Solgaleo and Lunala also had this below 100 speed stat, and limitations like Lunala's 2-4 times weaknesses that could be exploited because of its lower speed stat relative to most Pokemon made these restricted legendaries fairly balanced. Of course, there were a few truly broken legendaries, but they were rare and not regularities. That speed stat always remained consistent though. There were few restricted legendaries that crossed that 98 speed stat, and the ones that did had it at an incredible cost. Take Mewtwo, the Pokemon created to stand at the top, the ultimate Pokemon, and a Pokemon who no longer has any purpose. Mewtwo is a pure Psychic type with a 154 special attack, 130 speed, and decent bulk. Its signature move, Side Strike, is a nice 100 base power special Psychic move that hits a single target on their physical defense side instead of their special. Mewtwo did have an amazing 130 speed stat, but it was a Pokemon more focused on the target in front of it, rather than the entire board state. It was strong but could only hit one Pokemon at a time and provided very little team support, as its ability effectively did nothing. Still though, Mewtwo had its strong traits with a sky-high special attack and speed, so it was a trade-off. A high speed for the lack of ability and spread options. In VGC it wasn't over-centralizing, but it wasn't horrible. At least, in the past. Now Mewtwo sees no play at all, but why is that? Well, it's because the new Pokemon are strictly better. They have all the strengths of Mewtwo, but none of the drawbacks. With a massive power creep brought about by Scarlet and Violet, a new speed tier was created. 135. 5 points faster than Mewtwo. And the thing is, all of these Pokemon are ever present and can one-hit KO Mewtwo easily. Even if their attacking sets look inferior, in practice they are far better. Hadron Engine gives Miraidon a 30% boost on his special attack when electric terrain is active. Seems pretty normal, right? Well, keep in mind that this ability also sets electric terrain for itself, which boosts its stab electric moves by 30%, and activates its ability's other effect. So sure, its 135 special attack isn't as strong as Mewtwo's 154, but in practice this hardly matters because it's getting an additional 30% boost from Hadron Engine, or 2 30% boosts if it's collecting electric type moves. And again, it's faster. Koraidon, same thing, but it's for its attack stat and Sun. It's faster and one-shots Mewtwo, and unlike the more niche Violet Paradox Pokemon, its Sun also lets it boost the absurd partners that are the Scarlet Paradox Pokemon, including Fluttermane, who's faster and one-shots it, and with Sun Up, or Booster Energy, it can get faster or stronger too. Whatever it likes. Shen Pao's ability may not outright boost its attack, but its ability to reduce the opponent's defense has a similar effect that your partner can also take advantage of. Mewtwo's now being outdone by non-restricted Pokemon too because of power creep. I mean, how could it compete? Everything's faster and stronger where it matters now. There's no cost to using the speed either. You have the speed and the great support, and far higher damage than Mewtwo. But all of this pales in comparison to the legendary Pokemon added in Generation 8, Calyrex Shadow Rider, which completely killed Mewtwo off. Calyrex Shadow Rider is a Psychic type like Mewtwo, but it's also a Ghost type, giving it a Fake Out immunity and a second stab option. Calyrex has comparable bulk to Mewtwo and much lower attack. That's not the important part. No, the attack stat never mattered, and honestly the bulk being a little lower doesn't really matter either. The two stats that really count are special attack and speed. Mewtwo has a base 130 speed stat and a base 154 special attack, while Calyrex has a monstrous 150 speed and 165 Special attack stat. Do you see why Mewtwo doesn't see any use now? Calyrex is a strict upgrade. It's faster, it's stronger, and while sure its weaknesses are slightly worse, it's not as though Mewtwo was some tank that could take a ton of attacks that Shadow Rider couldn't. And its ghost typing gives it a fake out immunity, and with the ability to terrestrialize, those weaknesses can simply be erased. It also has the move Astral Barrage, a 120 base power ghost type move that hits both opponents at the same time, something Mewtwo could not do. Well, outside of the move Expanding Force, but guess who also gets that? If this wasn't enough to convince you that Calyrex is just a strictly better Mewtwo, let's take a look at their abilities. Mewtwo has Pressure and Unnerve, both marginally useful abilities, but they don't really boost Mewtwo's ceiling at all. Calyrex, on the other hand, has Grim Neigh, an ability that boosts the special attack of the user every time it picks up a KO, allowing it to snowball incredibly easily, and it also has the Unnerve ability that Mewtwo has. But when I say Calyrex has the Grim Neigh and Unnerve ability, I mean it has them at the same time. The true name of Calyrex's ability is As One, which combines both Grim Neigh and Unnerve, meaning it has Mewtwo's most useful ability at the same time as Grim Neigh. So it's Mewtwo, but it also just boosts its damage output, allowing it to snowball. This is the most blatant form of power creep. You take Mewtwo, you give it better stats, and you take away weaknesses it had and give it new strengths. Calyrex has been synonymous with restricted formats, being one of the top threats alongside Miraidon and Koraidon, as well as its other Ice Rider form, while the legends of old struggle to keep up. Remember, these old legendary Pokemon were the strongest of the strongest, but in a mere generation or two, they now struggle to keep up. And it's not just the legendary Pokemon or the starters getting insane treatment. Power creep is creating monsters out of quote-unquote normal Pokemon. If you're enjoying this video, I'd really appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, comment, or hype the video. I put a ton of effort into my content, and as a smaller creator, your support goes a long way. Okay, back to the video. Gimmick Pokemon have always existed, starting with Generation 1's Ditto, who could copy your opponent, but these gimmicks have always been held back a lot. Take Smeargle's extremely poor base stat total, or Shedinja's Wonder Guard being given to a Pokemon with a type full of weaknesses and no immunities to alternative damage. Of course, a gimmick can extend beyond a gimmick Pokemon, like Fear Rattata for example. It looks pretty strong in videos, but it's quite weak generally. And here is where we get into another problem power creep introduces. These gimmicks and new strategies that are new into the game are often extremely volatile. And to see this, look no further than Dondozo. It's a pure water type, slow but extremely bulky. It's already a good Pokemon in its own right, with access to great moves and Yawn, Wave Crash, and Curse alongside 3 great abilities in Unaware, Oblivious, and Water Veil. This is before you add in the gimmick though. When a Tatsugiri with the ability Commander is on the field at the same time as Dondozo, it jumps into Dondozo's mouth and gives it 2 stat boosts to all of its stats except HP. This turns Dondozo into a different beast altogether. Its already amazing bulk becomes Herculean. The 1 stat Tatsugiri doesn't boost is already massive to begin with, and the rest get turbocharged. Dondozo Tatsugiri, or Dozogiri, is an extremely volatile strategy. To begin, let's start with the activation. Every turn you have to factor in whether Tatsugiri will be switched in for Dondozo to eat, and if you target into the Tatsugiri slot, your attack will be completely nullified. That's right, the attack isn't redirected to Dondozo, it instead acts as though Tatsugiri is a target that it missed. This also reduces the damage of spread-type moves on the incoming Dondozo, but that pales into comparison to the threat level of Dondozo itself. The Commander stat boost turns Dondozo into a boss battle, one that can have multiple phases. See, Dondozo has taken many shapes over the course of Scarlet and Violet, from the 2-2-2 strategies using 3 different offensive cores to make your opponent guess which are coming, to the Galarian using more stall teams. But all of these have one thing in common: volatility. Dondozo turns the game into a do you have the answer or not guessing game. Many teams simply do not have the tools to overwhelm Dondozo, making it an extremely awful matchup. But if they do, they turn it into a fish fillet. It's not a healthy Pokemon to have. It not only makes playing the game less fun, it also makes team building less fun because you don't want to leave yourself open to it. Of course, in higher power regulations, we have more general tools to fight Dondozo like Urshifu, but Urshifu itself is another toxic element. All in all, Dondozo Tatsugiri is a gimmick who has a very specific counterplay, and that creates an extreme strain on team building that bogs down the core of Pokemon. And sometimes Dondozo can find new forms to push its strengths even further, which can shift its matchup chart immensely. Both team building and battling have been bogged down because of Dondozo, as without such counterplay to Dondozo Tatsugiri, it can be an incredibly horrible experience to play. But if your team does have tools to deal with it, it can be a walk in the park. Moving on, Urshifu, introduced in the Isle of Armor DLC in Sword and Shield, comes with the ability Unseen Fist, which allows it to bypass the central defensive tool in VGC that makes the entire format work: Protect. So Urshifu can simply click its offense without having to worry about the opponent clicking the move that most Pokemon carry in VGC. But that's not all. If you thought the defensive counterplay would be to use Intimidate or Reflect, you'd be in store for a nasty surprise when Urshifu delivers its Wicked Blow or Surging Strikes, moves that clock in around 120 base power when factoring in the fact that they always land a critical hit. So they ignore Intimidate and Reflect that you might use to stop it. It's been a scourge on VGC throughout Scarlet and Violet because of its ability, and it's something that shouldn't exist at all. A similarly volatile strategy to Dondozo is Psy Spam, an archetype that sets Psychic Terrain then aims to break the opponent using the most powerful Psychic type move in the game, Expanding Force. It's a move with an initial 80 base power, but it gets a 50% boost and turns into a spread move in Psychic Terrain. But that's before the additional 30% damage boost from Psychic Terrain too. It's like Dondozo in that if you don't have the right counters, it just runs you over with little room to outplay by throwing a volley of damage at you, and you can't even try to protect around because it hits both of your Pokemon at once. Indeed, female sing the Psychic Terrain also prevents you from using priority moves and allows it to redirect attacks from its partner, making the strategy even more difficult to overcome. Of course, this strategy and Dondozo has its counters, but that doesn't mean they're good to have in the game. Okay, so why does this matter? If the power level of the game increases, won't everything just balance out eventually? The answer to that is no, sort of. Sure, every Pokemon has its counters, but with the power level of the game, it often boils down to a rock, paper, scissors sort of deal, where the strongest teams in the metagame will have a counter, but the counter team will be weak to another style, or a bunch of different team styles with various gimmicks like Psy Spam and Dondozo, and then those teams are weak to the strongest teams in the metagame. Of course, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Matchups are a fundamental part of Pokemon, but it does become a bad thing when the power level is so high, these matchups are so lopsided that the games are won before they're played. When you remove counterplay that teams generally carry, like Protect and Intimidate, it becomes even harder to fight Pokemon that your team matches up poorly into. It's already hard to pivot around Urshifu, but when you can't protect against it, if your team has a bad matchup into it, it's horrible. How do you beat Dondozo if your team isn't specifically equipped to fight it? Therein lies one of the biggest issues of power creep. It makes the game less fun to play. When massive spread damage is coming at you, you really can't just predict which slot your opponent is going to target to outplay. You have to have an answer inbuilt into your team, or you just can't fight back. When new Pokemon are created with so few weaknesses, it just commands you have a specific answer like Incineroar. Otherwise, you just get smoked. Almost every single format of Scarlet and Violet has had an extremely problematic Pokemon or two that have warped the game around themselves in a negative way, and it's made the entire generation less fun as a result. I think most players would agree with this. At least, maybe for specific formats anyway. This feeds into the second major power creep issue: team building. Pokemon is a game just as much about your team as it is the battle itself. With Pokemon like Dondozo, Urshifu, and Calyrex, you need to dedicate large portions of your team to countering them, or you just get run over. This makes team building a lot less enjoyable because the counterplay options are incredibly limited, not just because of the rad damage output of moves like Astral Barrage, but because of how the power ceiling is raised. A big part of what makes Pokemon enjoyable is using uncommon or underrated Pokemon and finding a place where they can truly shine. But that becomes harder and harder when they're getting blown up by a Glacial Lance that only a rare few Pokemon can switch into, while also being able to switch into an Astral Barrage. When the power ceiling is raised so high by power creep, more and more Pokemon are left behind. I'm not asking for every Pokemon to be viable, but we don't need to make Pokemon that filter out half the existing pool of Pokemon from competitive play just because of how strong they are. And that also pigeonholes teams into using a small selection of Pokemon so they can have a fighting chance against the Titans. There's also the issue of power creep making old Pokemon completely obsolete by creating Pokemon Pokemon with drawbacks so little that there's no reason to consider them over the stronger alternative? Does team building become more interesting when the question of support Pokemon isn't Arcanine or Persian, but rather just Incineroar? Is the game more interesting when a Mega Evolved Pokemon like Mega Ampharos is completely outclassed by a no drawback Pokemon like Raging Bolt? I'll let you answer that in the comments. As I said before, power creep is an inevitable part of every game, right? So how can we address it? Well, truth be told, Pokemon is a rare game that doesn't actually need power creep to stay fresh. As you may know, in 2019, Game Freak announced a controversial decision to not have every single Pokemon present in new releases going forward. And I'm not going to go into the controversy, but one of the benefits from this could be that broken Pokemon aren't brought back into future releases. Or maybe we could just leave out a few metagame staples to keep it fresh. This means there's no real need to create monsters like Miraidon and Koraidon, as you can simply keep their competition out the game. This keeps the power level stable and it doesn't have to increase at all. But I don't even think this is the best solution. It can just be parts of it. The simpler, much simpler way of solving this power creep issue is to just not create Pokemon this absurd and nerf the ones that are. I mean, Incineroar's been terrorizing the team builder for almost a decade at this point, but rather than address this, they add band-aid solutions like buffs to random abilities and Clear Amulet. But they do this while at the same time buffing Incineroar with moves like Parting Shot and Helping Hand. And then they create Pokemon like Raging Bolt, which completely outclassed Mega Evolved Pokemon. It would be far better if Mega Ampharos was the stronger of the two, with all the good traits of Raging Bolt, as it comes at a cost, using your item and your Mega Evolution Pokemon on Ampharos. But instead, Raging Bolt exists, which is everything Ampharos is, but better. Again, does anybody think the game is better with Urshifu in it? They're going far too overboard with some of the new Pokemon. Does Garganacl really need a Ghost Resistance, Immunity to Status, and Assault Cure all at the same time? This is just a random Pokemon you catch in a random province at the beginning of the game. Did Sneasler need to have a roulette machine baked into his Dire Claw alongside Unburden and a massive attack and speed stats? Does Archaludon need a 100% accurate 120 base power coverage move that always boosts its special attack on top of its pseudo-legendary stats and stamina ability that gives it a defense boost every time it's hit? I could go on and on and on and showing how overtuned a lot of these Pokemon are. And that's the problem. They don't need to be, and yet they are. They keep overtuning these Pokemon to a degree that they're problematic and a strain on the game. Pokemon are given more and more gimmicks and strong traits that push them over the top, and therein lies the core issue of power creep in Pokemon. It's moving way too fast and pushing the power level far too forward. Again, power creep isn't a bad thing necessarily. Donphan was power crept by Great Tusk, and that's okay. Great Tusk is a fun Pokemon with many weaknesses and strengths, and Donphan had long since fallen out of favor anyway. But Urshifu, breaking through Protect, Intimidate, and Screens, isn't. Now, you know how I feel about the issue, but this conversation isn't over yet. I need to know what you think on the matter. Is power creep going too far, or maybe you enjoyed the heightened power ceiling? I need to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know if you're speaking from a singles or VGC perspective. If you enjoyed the video, again, I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe, like, or hype the video. My content primarily focuses on these kinds of subjects and discussions, and your support goes a long way. But regardless, thank you for watching, and until next time, see ya.